A storm like nothing we've seen before.
The worst natural disaster in the history of this area.
Dozens of people killed, tens of billions of dollars in damages.
I never saw anything like the devastation that I saw that day.
Now 10 years of recovery, controversy, and preparing for the next one.
I would think that they should have learned from Sandy. Now, but what they'll do, that remains to be seen.
Thank you for joining us. For 10 years since Superstorm Sandy, I'm Jacqueline London.
And I'm Jim Rosenfield. From the storm surge to the resilience of those facing rebuilding to changes made to help prevent damage from a future hurricane, the Jersey Shore has been through a lot in the last decade.
And there's no better way to start our look back at Superstorm Sandy than with NBC 10 Jersey Shore Bureau reporter Ted Greenberg. Ted doesn't just cover the shore for us, he lives there and is a part of the community.
He also covered the storm even while his own home was right in the storm's path. Now he takes us to the area where Sandy made landfall.
They became the defining images of a monster storm.
It was just absolute devastation.
I saw houses in water. I saw cars in water.
The boardwalk was all up. Buildings were shattered. Windows were broken.
When Hurricane Sandy slammed the Jersey Shore,
I would say it looked closest to a war zone.
Ortley Beach was ground zero.
There were houses in the middle of the road. There were whole blocks with nothing there.
I thought my wife was going to pass out. Everything was gone.
A massive storm surge decimated the boardwalk, businesses and homes. A boat wedged inside this one.
Like nothing I've ever seen before.
Some houses completely washed away.
I was besides myself. It looked like a bomb hit.
We were all in tears. 99% of the houses and structures in Ortley Beach were damaged in that storm.
For many, building back from Sandy and dealing with insurance claims turned out to be a long, frustrating journey.
We had FEMA, $250,000, had it for 25 years. They gave us $70,000, and I had to fight for that.
You're reminded every day, wherever you go, about people still trying to recover.
A decade later, this section of Toms River Township is still a work in progress, the landscape significantly different. While much of Ortley Beach has been rebuilt, including the boardwalk, most of the small bungalows that made up this coastal community before Sandy have been replaced by much larger and much more expensive homes.
It isn't the Ortley Beach it was before. Many people were simply pushed out because they could not afford to recover.
In some spots, the progress has been painfully slow. You can still find vacant lots around, including this one, located right across the street from the boardwalk and beach.
You still have the areas that people just sit abandoned, like the one across the street from me. I've been looking at that for the last 10 years, hoping that they'd finally do something.
Seaside Heights, next to Ortley Beach, also not spared Sandy's wrath.
In my wildest dreams, I never saw anything like the devastation that I saw that day.
This is where the Jetstar roller coaster plunged into the ocean, the waves crashing against it, the infamous image seen around the world.
It really was that iconic image of the Jersey Shore, of Superstorm Sandy, what it did to this whole entire town and along the coast.
Sandy ravaged Casino Pier. The boardwalk attraction was reconstructed to make it less vulnerable to future storms.
It did give us an opportunity to start fresh, in a sense.
The community's current mayor believes Seaside Heights was unprepared for a storm of this magnitude.
We had an emergency management plan, and it was followed, but it was lukewarm, not to the severity of this. Now we have dunes. We didn't have dunes prior to the storm. I know we're better prepared.
As devastating as the storm was, the mayor of Seaside Heights says it also helped accelerate a much-needed change to the town's image.
During the summers of the last 4 or 5 years, we have been a destination for families. We've eliminated some of the problems of rowdiness, rental disturbances, behaviors that aren't appropriate.
The superstorm triggered a wave of new construction here as well. Jersey Shore towns forced to move forward and learn from the lessons left in Sandy's wake.
One good thing came out of the severity of that storm is it gave us a future vision where we planned ahead, not only for growth and change of image, but also for preparation for the future if this ever happened again.
In Ocean County, I'm Ted Greenberg, NBC 10 News.
Sandy was a massive storm that at one point stretched from the Bahamas to Canada. But what makes a superstorm super, and why did it take a left turn and hit New Jersey with such force? For those questions, we turn to NBC 10 First Alert meteorologist Steve Sosna.
To understand what a superstorm like Sandy is, we got to go back to Sandy's roots. And these are roots that most of us along the Jersey Shore and Delaware are very familiar with, right? We're talking about tropical cyclones. You know them better as tropical depressions, tropical storms, and hurricanes. Of course, that top tier hurricanes being some of the strongest storms on Earth, winds sustained over 74 miles per hour, all of them thriving off water temperatures usually warmer than 80 degrees. And the definition of these storm systems becomes important for issuing warnings. We're talking about storms that have a warm core from that warm ocean water, that command center really well defined, and those thunderstorms wrapping around that center of circulation. You know it better as an eye on satellite. Sandy's journey took it over thousands of miles of open water, even up until the day of landfall, feeding off the warm Gulf Stream. Water temperatures above 80, that means thunderstorms are thriving. That center is nice and warm and well defined, meeting all the check marks of what the Hurricane Center labels a hurricane. However, the narrative started changing quickly with the storm system when it made that left hook over toward the New Jersey coast. What it started to do? Feed off of water temperatures much colder than 80 degrees in the lower 60s. So you can see what that did to the storm system. Only thunderstorms on one side. We're not seeing that wrapping around the center. And so the Hurricane Center said, Sandy no longer is a hurricane because it's just not meeting those bullet points of having a warm core, now a cold core, storms around the center. Yeah, we're kind of stormless except for one side. And so hurricane warnings were not issued. The problem with that, people not paying attention to what a post-tropical cyclone is. Superstorm explains Sandy much better than a post-tropical cyclone. But in the future, to get people to act, we need to issue better warnings. And that means that storms like Sandy in the future, well, even though it may not be a textbook hurricane, it still has personality attributes and impacts that are severe enough to be like hurricanes. And that means hurricane warnings will be issued. And the storm surge language is much clearer now. Instead of saying above mean water level, nobody's pulling out their calculator, we're talking about 6 feet above dry ground. That means if you're 6 feet tall or less, you know that's above your head. We're talking about language that's easy to understand, and that's why to get people to act. It's not the wind, it's not the rain that's so memorable with Superstorm Sandy. It's the storm surge, the wall of water pushing on shore that wiped homes off their foundation. Already, Sandy had a higher than average tide to work with, about 20% greater than average because of the full moon. Throw in 1,000 miles worth of tropical storm force winds pushing that wall of water on shore. If that wasn't enough, Sandy hit the gas pedal. That acceleration, that force pushed more water on shore with 15-foot waves, knocking homes off their foundation. The record level for storm surge at Sandy Hook was right around 9 feet, and we broke that record before the sensor went out. But Sandy impacted over 26 states. We're talking about areas of snow across West Virginia, up to 36 inches, power outages by the millions across the East Coast, deadly storm surge, and destructive waves up across the Great Lakes.
Steve, thank you. 10 years ago, NBC 10 had reporters spread out across our area in Philly, the PA suburbs, at the Delaware beaches, New York, and of course, a number of places at the Jersey Shore. One of those reporters was Rosemary Connors. Rosemary and photojournalist Jason Ryan covered the storm in Beach Haven, New Jersey. When conditions worsened, they sought shelter at a bed and breakfast just blocks from the ocean. Rosemary went back to the B&B to see how the storm changed its business.
A lot's changed in 10 years. I'm pregnant with my second.
Oh, you're kidding.
The innkeepers,
So we're about full again, huh?
Betty and Merle Van Leer, have taken care of hundreds of guests on Long Beach Island since the couple arrived at the Williams Cottage Inn 16 years ago.
We're originally from the Midwest, from South Dakota. We dealt with blizzards and tornadoes. We never paid much attention to what was happening down south or on the East Coast, hurricanes. Now we pay a lot of attention.
Sandy pummeled LBI. Our cameras captured its unprecedented power.
What are your memories from 10 years ago?
Darkness in the house, because we were boarded, if you remember, when you got here in the middle of the night and it was very dark, but we were boarded with wood on every window from this floor to the 3rd floor.
Sandy was definitely a different storm. It was that large.
At the height of the storm, the ocean was so powerful it ripped down walls, sending a flood of sand and water through the home.
That was then. Today, there are no reminders of the damage caused by Sandy, but the superstorm does have a lasting legacy when it comes to the landscape of the beach. Dunes, designed by the Army Corps of Engineers, now buffer beachfront properties.
We always had dunes, but they weren't suitable for a Sandy-type storm.
Joe Mancini is the mayor of Long Beach Township and has lived on this narrow 18-mile island almost all of his life. He'll never forget the day Sandy struck.
This was all level, and the water was running down the street 2 foot high like a river.
In the wake of Sandy, a government beach replenishment project would ultimately dump hundreds of millions of dollars up and down New Jersey's coast to construct dunes high enough and wide enough to match another superstorm and protect properties. Advocates described it as necessary. Critics called it controversial.
What was that process like, trying to convince homeowners?
We had to establish a dune line which was on people's properties. So we had to create an easement that the people, the oceanfront homeowners, had to sign.
Most, including Mancini, who had a beachfront property at the time, did sign. Those who didn't were forced by eminent domain and have challenged how much the government will compensate them.
I still have a half a dozen holdouts that we're still in court on.
But Mayor Mancini expects them to be resolved soon. As a longtime builder and realtor on the island, he credits the dunes with adding, not detracting value.
All in all, property values since Sandy on the ocean front have to be up at least 75%. Look at them blowing.
Beyond the dunes, you can still see all of Mother Nature's majesty, even a pod of whales swimming south on a beautiful fall day.
We'll be ready for the guests.
As for Betty and Merle Van Leer, even at this stage of life, Sandy has taught them lessons. Next time, they tell me they will think twice about riding out a storm.
We felt we had a responsibility, Williams Cottage Inn, to see it through, and that's why we stayed.
And we did.
And they are here to stay until the next Sandy.
Coming?
On Long Beach Island, I'm Rosemary Connors, NBC 10 News.
The Dunes projects have definitely been controversial, but it's not the only aspect of the Sandy recovery that's frustrated homeowners. Coming up, the issues some people are still having with the state program that was supposed to help them rebuild, and why New Jersey says some homeowners need to pay back some of their grant money.
And later, my conversation with Glenn Hurricane Schwartz. He shares what it was like forecasting a superstorm.
Welcome back to 10 years since Superstorm Sandy. The rebuilding process hasn't been easy for so many homeowners. Some found the New Jersey program set up to offer relief difficult to navigate and frustrating to deal with.
Well, almost $1 billion in grants has been given out by the state to help residents rebuild or rehabilitate. A number of homeowners have been told they received too much money and they might have to pay some of it back. NBC 10 investigative reporter Claudia Vargas explains.
Oh, I don't even want to look at it. It makes me upset.
Brian and Marion Salkin loved living in the basement part of their Ventnor home, but Superstorm Sandy flooded their living area with 2 feet of water.
We lost everything.
We've been following the Salkins throughout the arduous rebuilding process and their issues with one of New Jersey's relief programs.
The REM program, as it is now, is providing us with aggravation.
The Salkins were one of 9,560 homeowners who received state grant money to rehabilitate or rebuild their home. Grant recipients could get up to $150,000. The Salkins say they received $125,000.
He had to put new floors in. He had to do the kitchen.
Other work included new stairs and filling the entire first floor. Now they say the state wants $25,000 back.
We haven't got any money left.
The Salkins are one of nearly 1,200 homeowners who the state says were overpaid grant money.
They couldn't marry all the invoices we sent in to what the work was done.
Because the couple received a $30,000 grant from an insurance program, the state looked to deduct that amount from their final balance. In total, the state wants back almost $29 million from Sandy home projects.
There's over 1,000 people that received more money than they needed to complete their project.
Sam Viavatin is the deputy commissioner of the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs. It's the agency that oversees the Sandy aid disbursement and recoupment efforts. He wouldn't speak about individual cases, but Viavatin says some people received money from various sources for the same home project. Others did not do as much work to their home as they initially said they would.
Somebody that initially elected to elevate their property, but then decided, you know what, I'm just going to repair my property.
In 2018, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy put an indefinite freeze on clawback payments.
In an ideal world, we wouldn't want to ask disaster victims to repay money.
The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development initially provided the grant money, and Viavatin says federal regulations require the state to pay back HUD for any duplication of benefits. A HUD spokesperson says in part in a statement that typically grantees such as New Jersey DCA engage in the recapture of funds from homeowners and other beneficiaries in lieu of repaying from their own funds amounts due to HUD for noncompliance, meaning the state doesn't have to ask homeowners for the money. It can use state funds to repay the feds.
This is kind of like where the door would have been.
Using state funds is what Joe Mangio, a Sandy survivor and activist, is pushing New Jersey to do. He testified at a recent hearing.
You could make the 10th anniversary for me a dream by having me sit next to the governor as he signs that bill for giving clawbacks.
A state Senate bill that would allow the use of general fund money to forgive the clawback is pending. So is a U.S. House bill that would allow HUD to completely forgive the debt.
We've been trying for years now at both levels, and it almost gets there and then gets kicked back.
Mangino has since resolved his own $4,000 state clawback.
And that is this.
Back in Ventnor, retired casino workers Brian and Marion Salkin now live above ground level.
I think if we didn't have the government involved, we could have done it a lot better, a lot quicker, and a lot cheaper.
But they now have a $25,000 debt to the state. Although there is a freeze on all such payments, if the Salkins were to sell their home, they will first have to resolve the debt. They say that will likely fall to their kids.
Realise we're both in our late 80s. I don't think we're going to last much longer, especially with all this aggravation.
In Ventnor, Claudia Vargas, NBC 10 News.
Sandy opened our eyes to the potential devastating impact of a coastal storm. And over the last 10 years, a lot of money's been spent and planning done. We're lucky we have not had another storm as large as Sandy. But NBC 10 investigative reporter Danny Freeman went looking to see if New Jersey is ready for the next one.
In 25 years of living in Atlantic City, Emmanuel Richardson has seen plenty of storms.
But not like Sandy. Sandy was brutal.
Emmanuel remembers the water flooded his entire first floor. He and his wife took shelter upstairs.
We took the necessities that we needed up there because we didn't have no power or electric.
Eventually, the water subsided and the cleanup began. But Emmanuel is not sure if lessons were learned.
Well, when this next storm comes, we don't know how it's going to come.
But 10 years after Sandy, the state believes it's more prepared than ever.
Whenever we see a storm rolling up the coast, we know we're better protected than we were 10 years ago.
Dan Kelly is the executive director of the New Jersey Governor's Disaster Recovery Office. At a recent state legislative hearing focused on lessons learned from Superstorm Sandy, Kelly laid out investments and improvements made in the past decade to make the Garden State more resilient to massive storms. That included nearly $2 billion of projects like dunes and flood prevention infrastructure, elevating nearly 7,000 homes off the ground, buying 800 flood-prone properties, and hardening the state's transit system and energy grid.
9 hospitals and 3 wastewater treatment plants, have what I like to refer to as microgrid technologies. When the larger grid fails, the lights stay on at those facilities.
But Kelly acknowledged New Jersey's mission is far from accomplished.
It requires a year-over-year, decade-over-decade commitment to investing tens of billions, not just billions, in storm protection and prevention projects.
Back down the shore, this is what the northeastern edge of Atlantic City looked like after Sandy blew through. Since then, Sandy relief funds have rebuilt the same spot.
The flooding is nothing like it used to be.
Because of this?
Because of this, because of bulkheading in other locations, and where homes are really low, raising the homes up.
State Assemblyman Don Guardian was elected Atlantic City's mayor 2 years after Sandy. He showed us post-Sandy infrastructure built for the next storm. But, he explained, more funding is needed to expand these protections near low-income areas. Do you feel better prepared today than you were 10 years ago if a big storm came?
So in the areas that we've been able to raise and bulkhead, the answer is yes. For people that are living in homes that are still low and are going to get flooded, the answer is no.
Just the other week, the remnants of Hurricane Ian flooded Emmanuel Street again. 10 years after Sandy, he and his neighbors expect their homes will flood again too.
I would think that they should have learned from Sandy. Now, but what they'll do, that remains to be seen.
From Atlantic City, Danny Freeman, NBC 10 News.
He was the meteorologist guiding us through Sandy. Glenn Hurricane Schwartz was one of the first to recognize the potential level of devastation that storm presented to our area.
I sat down with Glenn to discuss what it was like to forecast such a massive weather event. We also wanted to get a better understanding of why Sandy was so devastating and how climate change may play a role in these types of storms.
What was that moment like when you all of a sudden saw that model showing that it was turning and there was no way it was shifting back?
You know, you see the pictures afterwards. I can see the pictures beforehand. I'm picturing what is going to happen, and it's a horror to think about that, and you can't stop it. All you can do is to warn people about it and hope that your credibility built up over the years convinces them to do the right thing.
It had to be terrifying for you.
Well, I mean, I feel somewhat personally responsible for our viewers' safety. And you just want to scream, but you can't. You have to keep your wits about you and show the science, but also show the level of concern.
I think it's actually more intense than the Hurricane Center is saying officially.
And we remember those pictures clearly, just how the shore was devastated, wiped out, those homes obliterated.
And just cut right through islands, right? Barrier islands. And that is the storm surge. That's the power of water. If you take a cubic yard of water, okay, 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, that weighs almost a ton. And now picture that ton racing into the coast. And hour after hour after hour of it. And that power is what led to the destruction. It's not the wind.
It's that water that's so deadly,
the
water.
Flooding. Not the rainfall from it. Like with Harvey in Texas, you know, their disaster was because of the rainfall. In Andrew in South Florida, it was the wind. In Katrina, it was the levees. So every disaster has their own characteristics and the reason for the disaster. In Sandy, storm surge. Ian, storm surge.
There's been a lot of talk about climate change, the sea level rise, human caused. How much of an impact?
Well, first of all, there's no question the sea level has gone up in that area by more than a foot. that foot is added to whatever the storm does. So if everything else is equal, you're getting a foot more of storm surge. And the water is going to travel that much farther and travel into areas not covered by flood insurance, places that never flooded before. So that's pretty much of a certainty. The other thing that we're pretty sure about is that the warm waters off the East Coast helped Sandy keep its strength longer and not weaken as quickly as it would have if it had hit 50 years ago.
You can see more of my interview with Glenn Hurricane Schwartz on NBC10.com, as well as some of our Sandy coverage from over the past decade. I'm Jacqueline London.
And I'm Jim Rosenfield. Thank you for joining us for 10 years since Superstorm Sandy.